All week, you've heard exactly what is going to happen in this game from everybody, media sources everywhere. Well, we're going to tell you exactly why Ole Miss is going to win Saturday. This is the Locked On Ole Miss podcast.
You are Locked On Ole Miss, your daily podcast on the Ole Miss Rebels, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to the Locked On Ole Miss podcast. I am your host, Stephen Willis, doing multiple recordings a day to try and get this podcast to you in the face of Hurricane Ian. So we are doing that. So if there's an issue, if there's not a timely issue, you can just chalk it up to that essentially, and we can go from there because there's not really a whole lot that I can do, but there's a chance. I just don't want it to be a couple of days without power and then you guys missing out on what's going on. We're going to do a post-game show. If I have to Instagram live it, it will be done this weekend as well. So this hurricane has kind of put us a little bit at a loss, and we're just trying to make this work the best we can. So what I'm doing right now is trying to bank a whole bunch of shows. As it stands, I'm recording on a Monday today, and this show airs on, obviously, Wednesday. So I'm doing 2 on Monday, 2 on Tuesday, and that should carry us until the Kentucky game. But we'll see whatever happens. Anyway, this episode, I'm going to let you know exactly why Ole Miss will win the football game on Saturday. You don't even have to pay attention. Ole Miss is going to win the game if they do these three things. First of all, they have superiority in the trenches, right? Superiority in the trenches is going to allow them to handle this a little bit different. The highest yards per carry that Kentucky has rushed for this season is 2.9 yards. Will Levis has thrown for over 300 a couple of times. Also has thrown 3 or 4 interceptions along the way, so that's worth keeping an eye on as well. Before we get too far into this, I do want to thank you for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. So do us a favor, subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, and of course, take part in the show by upvoting the video and commenting below if there's anything that is on your mind. So we do appreciate it. Thank you very much, and let's just keep growing this thing. So superiority in the lines is kind of a big deal, honestly. It's going to allow Ole Miss to run the ball. It's going to allow Ole Miss to stop the run. And it honestly has a chance to make Kentucky one-dimensional. If Kentucky gets to be one-dimensional, this thing might be over with Ole Miss playing with 6 defensive backs. I don't know how it goes. The first time you see this defense, you struggle with it. Now, it doesn't happen every time you see this defense. Otherwise, this would be the perfect defense and everybody would play it. But the first time you see it, the windows are a little bit smaller. Everything looks a little bit different. It's lined up coming at you from different angles. It forces the quarterback to think and maybe hold the ball for a beat or two longer than he was planning on. That superiority in the trenches, especially if Ole Miss gets back Kari Coleman and J.J. Pegues this week, has a chance to be special in this game and honestly could be the decisive factor in this game at all. As we all know, in SEC football, games are won in the trenches. Offensive and defensive line, period. That war, it's not going to change no matter how teams play offense. It's always going to come back to the trenches. But Kentucky, which has had a significantly good defensive line and offensive line for 3 or 4 years now, their defensive line is still good. I would classify them and their whole defense as good to very good. Not great, just good to very good. Their offensive line, though, has been kind of shambolic. I'm going to read off y'all with some yards per carry number. Against Northern Illinois, they ran 35 carries for 103 yards. That's a 2.9 per carry average. That does include some Will Levis sacks in there as well. Against Miami, Ohio, 26 carries for 50 yards, 1.9 yards per carry. Florida, 38 carries for 70 yards, 1.8 yards per carry. You see where I'm going here? This is a big thing, and Kavosiey Smoke has been their guy at running back, so they do get Chris Rodriguez back. That's important to know. But Kavosiey Smoke is not an also-ran type running back. Here's the coup de grace. Youngstown State, the Penguins, Penguins. 36 carries for 103 yards, 2.9 yards per carry. That included a 24-yard Will Levis run, and Will Levis finished with 3 yards. So there have been sack problems all through this season. They're having trouble opening up running lanes. If these sack yardages were taken away, Kentucky would still be about 130, 140 yards. We're not talking about anything really major as far as the sack losses, but the sack exists. Now, if we pair this with Will Levis's passing number, he was 27 to 35 for 377, 2 touchdowns and 2 picks against Youngstown State. Against Kentucky, he was 13 to 24, 202, 1 TD and a pick. Okay, nothing overly special. 21 for 32, 303, 3 touchdowns and a pick against Miami of Ohio. Against Northern Illinois, Will Levis threw for 300 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions. So he has gone over 300 yards. I think, let's look at this again. 1, 2, didn't on that one. And did on that one. So he's gone over 300 yards in 3 of their 4 games. Their wide receiving unit has been pretty good. But I do go back. The first time you see this defense, and I looked it up, Kentucky has not played Arkansas in the last few years. Not since 2019. And Barry Odom was in Missouri at that point. So Will Levis likely has not seen this defense and what they do. So I anticipate Will Levis turning the ball over once, maybe twice in this game. They're probably going to try and gun the ball downfield. I expect Ole Miss to make a little bit of hay at this. Hopefully, Kari Coleman's back. If Kari Coleman is back, it's a significant advantage in the trenches for Ole Miss. So we'll see. Ole Miss is running right now for about 300 yards a game between Zach Evans and Quinshon Judkins. Kentucky has a good to very good defense. It is not worth overlooking that at all. This is a good team, especially in pass defense. Until Northern Illinois threw 2 touchdowns, I don't know if they gave up one this season. Also, Jaquez Jones and Keydron Smith play for the Kentucky Wildcats. So they will have some sort of an idea of how this Kiffin offense runs. So, should be interesting. Should be absolutely interesting. Anyway, we have Chris Gordy coming up in the 3rd segment, and he's going to talk about the Ole Miss Kentucky game. He's going to be talking about other games around the league. He's the Locked On SEC person. If you look down there and it says Watch Next, Locked On SEC, he's the person. So he's going to be on the show today. Anyway, I just read off some stats and whatever's going on. The offensive line has been a problem for Kentucky. Will Kentucky get it fixed? Probably. Eventually this season they will get it fixed. Will they get it fixed Saturday? Maybe. Chris Rodriguez coming back. It's amazing what having a good running back will do for a struggling offensive line. Now, him and Kavosiey Smoke, all of a sudden Kavosiey Smoke is a second team back, and that running game looks a little bit different. Instead of 100 yards a game, they're averaging 160. Nothing has really changed except for the fact that there's a better running back and they're leaning into it a little bit more. But we'll see how Ole Miss exactly handles this Kentucky offense. I do believe, watching the game, that even though Kentucky has thrown for over 300 yards 3 times, the first thing they need to take away is the run. They need to handle Chris Rodriguez. Do not let him get going. Force Kentucky to be one-dimensional, and then you can play. Then you can dance. That is what Ole Miss needs to do, and it should be really interesting to see what happens in the next couple of days. Seriously. Anyway, I do want to tell you about BetOnline. BetOnline is your #1 source for football betting info this season. Find all the latest player developments, team matchups, news, podcasts, in-depth articles and analysis on every game you can find, which we all do, right? And as always, BetOnline remains your continued source for all of your sport wagering information with live betting and up-to-the-minute scores for every sport out there. The fastest and easiest way to check in on all your favorite games, including Major League Baseball, MMA, boxing, golf, and MLS. Head to betonline.net or use your mobile device to learn more. It's BetOnline. It's where the game starts. All right, thanks again for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including iTunes and Spotify. Say whatever you want to say. Just make sure it's a 5-star review. For instance, if you search Ole Miss podcast on the Google machine, the Locked On Ole Miss podcast comes up. This is what this is for. This is why we are doing this, is to try and get that bumped up and people can find what we're doing. And if you found us that way, hey, mention us in the comments below. Thank you very much. All right, and also with Hurricane Ian coming through, people, I've actually gotten a message or two about our giveaway this week with Kara McCutcheon. Tomorrow I'm going to record with her for her normal Thursday slot or Friday slot because we might be doing the crossover. Although the crossover may be for Friday. I do not know exactly how we're going to do this, but it could actually be for Friday as well. So the day that's not the crossover will be the Kara McCutcheon giveaway episode where she will give away the other hat. I appreciate everybody that took part last week, but she's going to find that information, get your address, and get that out to you pretty quickly. Thank you very much for taking part in that. All right, the second thing that people need to realize that is going to be a reason that Ole Miss is going to win this game. It's going to be a relatively short game. Both teams are going to do it. Kentucky's time of possession is like 33 to 34 minutes. Ole Miss doesn't mind not having a ton of time possession. They're okay with defensive play volume. But because Kentucky also plays that way, with time of possession, you could have a situation maybe not as pronounced as what Tennessee did last year, but you could see a lopside with Kentucky with 36, 37 minutes of time of possession and Kentucky losing the game, 42 to 24 or something like that. These offenses really break all the rules to what you thought you knew about football. It's ridiculous. But it's going to be a short game, and I think since Ole Miss has the explosiveness advantage, even though Kentucky has a couple of really good wide receivers that they use all the time, I think in explosiveness, you got Quinshon Judkins, you got Zach Evans, you got Jonathan Mingo, you've got Malik Heath, even Michael Trigg, and Jalen Robinson is going to come back potentially this week. This would be a game that would be a tailor-made game for Jalen Robinson to break out. So I look forward to what this offense can do. The explosiveness factor, I like it over the drag it out, time of possession game. Because instead of 14 possessions, this game might have 10. And if you take away possessions of Kentucky, you make them an infinitely worse team if you have an explosive team that can score quickly. So if Ole Miss can score 4 touchdowns and 10 possessions and hold Kentucky to 2, Ole Miss is obviously going to win the game doing that. But I do think it's going to be a short game. So prepare for that. And the reason it's going to be short is the third key for victory. Ole Miss has the running back advantage in this game with Zach Evans and Quinshon Judkins, even Ulysses Bentley. They have so many different players that can come in and do different things that it will be interesting to see how Kentucky deals with it. Will they walk Jacquez Jones up to the line? Will they double A gap blitz? Will they do all of that stuff and open up behind them in the middle of the field? I am a big proponent of the middle of the field. Bill Flowers is a big proponent of the middle of the field. All of us talking about it, we just started looking at it and working at it, and there's like a 15-yard box around the middle of the field. So this game, the middle of the field needs to be used. We need to see some mesh concepts. We need to see some different stuff to utilize in the short passing game to make these linebackers think. We told you whenever this offense first got created and Lane Kiffin first got here, the purpose of this offense is to torture linebackers. You've probably, if you've listened to any semblance of time, you have heard that this offense was built to torture linebackers. And what we mean by that is on every play is probably going to lead to a false step. Are you going to go hard towards the line of scrimmage? Are you going to go back in pass coverage? No matter what you do, you can't actually be right because it's an RPO system. Now, this year that hasn't happened. That needs to happen because the offense is infinitely effective when it does. Now, I like the run game. I like what they're doing in the run game. Even the quarterback run game. That's fine. That's fantastic. I want to see Michael Trigg and Jalen Robinson or Jordan Watkins behind the linebackers in front of the safeties, making them play. Because the safety, if they're not worried about what's going to happen behind them, they're going to come up hard and put pressure on the quarterback and hit the quarterback and affect the running game in a negative way. You need those people protecting against the linebacker coming up. And then you need that safety worried about those receivers instead of the deep ball. And all of a sudden, these plays where you're sitting here worried about, it's like Jonathan Mingo can't get separation. Now all of a sudden he's 5-6 yards open because there's no safety help. That is what we want to happen. Again, it's a young quarterback. Everything's new. This is all a work in progress. But that is what we want to have happen. We want the run game and everything else, but that's where the development will happen. In the middle of the field, affecting those linebackers. Once those happen, you will see Jackson Dart take off. He will automatically go from being a really good quarterback to being an all-SEC level quarterback. And that is it. The 15-yard patch in the middle of the field. Once he learns how to manipulate those players, look out. Because you already see him running the ball. He's running out there looking like a plus Matt Corral. And I mean plus is in weight. Because Jackson Dart's running around at 220. Matt Corral was at 200. So it is really cool. His passes looked wonderful against Tulsa. It is fantastic. He had a good game. He did not have a bad game. I know people are going to try and poo-poo this game and talk about everything, but the reality is that game didn't matter much because we spent 6 months hyping up this game. And the fact that players were thinking about this game, it tells you all you need to know. So it should be really cool coming up. Should be really cool. I'm looking forward to this game at 11 o'clock on Saturday on ESPN. Ole Miss 6.5-point favorite. Over under is 54.5 per yesterday's Bet Online. But you know, if it changes, I apologize for that. But it should be really interesting to see, and I'm looking forward to what's going on. Anyway, coming up next, we have Chris Gordy from Locked On SEC. He's going to come in and talk about this game and a lot of the other games going on this week in the Southeastern Conference. So stick around. All right, thanks for making the Locked On Ole Miss podcast your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcast, including YouTube. So subscribe to the YouTube channel, hit the bell for notifications, and of course, hit the upvote button and comment to participate in the conversation. I am joined by Locked On Ole Misses, Locked On SECs, I should say, Chris Gordy. And you can look down here. Let's see, I think it's over in the corner over there. Watch next, Locked On SEC. How you doing, Chris?
I'm good, man. 4 weeks in, we're starting to get a little clarification on, what do they say, separate the men from the boys. I think that's what we're starting to see around the SEC. Still some unprovens. I kind of put Ole Miss in that category, not quite ready for prime time or haven't played prime time yet. I think this test this weekend against Kentucky is going to tell us a lot about the 2022 Ole Miss Rebels.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. In fact, the media around Ole Miss came in and said, we won't know anything about Ole Miss until after the Kentucky game. And they said that since February. So then they were act surprised whenever the Tulsa game, there's a letdown. And I was like, come on, y'all created this, man.
I predicted, I said last week, I thought I picked Tulsa to cover the spread. I just kept looking at, we were getting so overhyped about the Ole Miss defense. And I kept going, guys, they haven't been tested yet. And, look at Georgia Tech. They just fired their head coach this past week. Obviously, that was not a very good team. But I kept looking at Tulsa, and, they were the number one passing offense in the country. And the weird thing is how it played out with Ole Miss. They were pretty balanced. I mean, they ran the ball pretty well, threw the ball okay. And but, no, I thought that was a really good test, and probably what Lane Kiffin wanted. He probably wanted the defense to stop reading your press clippings. Hey, look, if Tulsa did that to you, what do you think some of these SEC offenses are going to do to you? So maybe it was a good humbling experience for Ole Miss. But man, I can't say enough about their run game. I mean, it's so funny. Matt Corral got all the headlines last year with Ole Miss, but man, Lane's staples have been, the two-headed, three-headed backfields that just run all over you. And this year they've taken it to another level. And I think maybe the quarterback. I don't want to say subpar quarterback play, but the average quarterback play that they've gotten from Daltmeyer so far, I think, has kind of been, well, let's go to our bread and butter. And man, has the ground game been so dominant. It's been so fun to watch.
Yeah, it's interesting because when the season started, you're like, okay, we have Zach Evans. He's a talent. Everybody knew what they had with him. And Ulysses Bentley IV, he was an all-conference player in the American coming over to Ole Miss. So obviously those are going to be the top two. And then Quinshon Judkins just steps in. Now he's second in the SEC in rushing. He has 4 or 5 touchdowns. And by the end of the year, he has a chance to be the best running back on this team when nobody thought that was possible.
It's crazy, dude. I was looking back through. I was like, did I miss something on him getting recruited? And, the service I was looking at, he was a 3-star. And he had offers from a lot of different SEC schools, Kentucky included, who he'll play this weekend. But, man, it was like, going back and looking at it, and all the running backs that were ranked ahead of him, it's like, man, somebody really missed on this guy because he is a weapon. And I had people asking me this week, did Zach Evans get hurt? Was he banged up? Is there a reason they've been featuring Judkins a little bit more? And I'm like, no, I think he's just taking advantage of his opportunity and proven his worth. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it balances out as the season goes along. Because don't get me wrong, Evans is really good too. So. To me, if I'm an Ole Miss fan, I don't care who's carrying it. They're all doing a good job of it right now.
Yeah, it's absolutely fantastic. Let's move on to the game this weekend. Ole Miss and Kentucky, SEC Nation, 11 a.m., ESPN. I think Ole Miss is favored by 6.5 right now, and the over-under is about 54.5 in the game. Because I think I got on our little college sports group chat, and it's like, hey, if Ole Miss is playing, just bet the under. And everybody's like, what? No, just bet the under right now. And what are some of the keys to the game for both teams that you're seeing?
I think for Kentucky, the big question is, what does Chris Rodriguez look like? It's no secret. 4 weeks in Kentucky, the run game has just not been there. I mean, Cavassier Smoke has been okay. Averaged, based on the opponents they played, he's averaging around 5 yards a carry, so that looks way more impressive. But if you just look at the run totals at the end of the first few games, it's been kind of unimpressive for a Kentucky team that is so used to dominating in the run game. And Chris Rodriguez has been a big part of that these last couple of years. I think, he's been practicing the last 2 weeks with the team. Everybody says, yes, he's coming back from the suspension this week, but the key is he's been practicing with the team a little bit, getting back into the flow of things. But like I said, I think the onus has kind of been on Will Levis these first few weeks in making him have to play superior well. And he's been great. I mean, a couple of 300-yard passing games, 10 touchdowns. The interception total, he's got 4. It's a little higher than you'd like, but I think he realizes he made a couple mistakes in the red zone, forced some balls he shouldn't have. But Will Levis has been very impressive, and that's without a good run game. Now is the pressure off Levis a little bit with having, if they're able to run the ball against Ole Miss, can they be a little bit more balanced? Because I'll tell you this, what I saw from teams the last couple of weeks, that O-line has not protected him very well. And again, maybe it's because they've been in more predictable passing downs, but I want to say it's 16 sacks. It's something crazy that they've given up already. He's one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the country. So if I'm Ole Miss, I'm looking at that. I'm saying, well, I'm going to bring pressure. I'm going to blitz him. I'm going to try to make him uncomfortable, force him into some mistakes. But again, that's countered if Chris Rodriguez is running rampant and he's doing some damage. So I think I don't want to put too much pressure on Chris Rodriguez, but there's a lot of this game plan, I think, centered around him. And if he's not able to run the ball and the onus is on Will Levis to make plays, again, I think Ole Miss can maybe be opportunistic and force some turnovers. So he's got 2 great weapons. Tavion Robinson has picked up right where Wan'Dale Robinson left off last year. He's a transfer from Virginia Tech. He's been outstanding. And then Dane Key, true freshman wide receiver for Kentucky, he's been great. And then Berrien Brown had a nice breakout game this past week for them. So they got a lot of weapons. On the flip side, what can Kentucky do to slow down Ole Miss's run game? Because, Kentucky's always kind of been known for that hard-nosed defense since Mark Stoops has been there. They have some nice players on that side of the ball, but to me, that's going to be the big key: is can Kentucky slow down Ole Miss's run game, and can Kentucky find their run game with Chris Rodriguez?
Yeah, I think looking at this game, like my number one key to the game for Ole Miss, I think Ole Miss has superior line play on both sides. And the SEC is always going to be a line-based league. So if you have the advantage there, if you can win that battle, so much is going to kind of take care of itself in this league.
It is. And, I think the other part of it, too, that I would look at, and I kind of touched on it a second ago, but, I guess this is Jackson Dart's team now. I mean, Altmaier was kind of hanging in there, but it looks like, they're kind of committed to Dart. What happens if this is a close game and they need Dart to go get them points late in the fourth quarter? What does that look like? Is he able to hit his weapons? Because, again, Ole Miss has got some weapons. I mean, I love Jonathan Mingo, all the different receivers. But, at times Dart's been off with his throws. And so, if they've got to go win a game with Jackson Dart, can they do that? In a 2-minute offense. I'll be curious to see that this week as well. But you're right. I mean, if we're talking edge in the offensive line, it's Ole Miss. And then, I kind of like what I've seen out of the defensive line so far for Ole Miss.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know about Ole Miss is if you had a boo-boo, any injury at all, you didn't play against Tulsa. They sat out and completely rested players. I think Ole Miss had 4 or 5 contributors that didn't play in that game, and they're just resting them up for Kentucky. Specifically, Kari Coleman, who has a step or two that's kind of a difference maker on the defensive side of the ball, which could be big, getting after Will Levis against a team that has been struggling pass protecting this year.
Yeah, I think what we've seen, too, is, a lot of different guys getting sacks already this year. It's not like it's just 1 or 2 guys. You mentioned Corey Coleman. Obviously, he's got a couple of them, but, it's a handful of guys all over that defense that have had sacks already this season. And so, be opportunistic, get after it. I think Arkansas still leads the SEC in sacks, I want to say, but Ole Miss is right up there. And, again, like we talk about, Will Levis, one of the most sacked quarterbacks in the league, or in the country. So, opportunistic moments for Ole Miss. I'm a little worried with it being an 11 a.m. game. I wonder how sleepy the crowd would be. I think the SEC and the ESPN family of networks really missed 2 opportunities these last 2 weeks. I mean, or this week and next week. Last week, Auburn, Missouri, that was such a disaster. That deserved to be an 11 a.m. game. That was like we all wanted to throw up watching that game. But this week, Ole Miss, Kentucky deserves to be at night. And then, next week, they already announced LSU, Tennessee is an 11 a.m. game. Like, what are we doing here? Like, both these games should be nighttime, primetime games. So it is what it is. But here's hoping the Grove is rocking and everybody brings it. Because, like I said, if it's, night games in SEC environments, it's just special. There's something different. The crowd brings it. Granted, there's the factor of everybody's been drinking and tailgating all day, and they're a little louder and rowdier at night. But again, sometimes these 11 a.m. games, teams are a little sleepwalky, and I wonder if we'll see that this weekend. If this is like a 7-3 game after the first quarter this week, wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, should be interesting. Now, we can't have Locked On SEC's host come on the program. What are some of the other games around the league you're paying attention to this week?
Yeah, just kind of starting to get into looking ahead at the ones that are intriguing. Obviously, this one I think is going to be is a monster one, just from a standpoint of Kentucky wants to keep their undefeated season going, and Ole Miss wants to keep their undefeated season going. But I think LSU Auburn at night is an interesting one, just from a standpoint of somebody told me that if Harsin had lost to Mizzou this past weekend, he was going to be fired by Sunday. What happens if they lose? And let's say they get embarrassed by an LSU team that's defense is playing very well, and offensively they're kind of getting better week by week. I'll be curious to see what's the reaction there. And is it dead man walking? Like I used the comparison in 2016 or 2015 rather, they were going to fire Les Miles, and at the end of the year they played A&M and they treated it like a farewell game to Les Miles, and everybody kind of knew it had run its course and he was going to be let go. He beats A&M. The players carry him on their shoulders off the field. And then the AD comes in and goes, no, we're not firing less. Why would we fire less? And then 2-3 games into the next season, they lose a heartbreaker at Auburn and Les Miles gets fired. You're just delaying the inevitable. We all know Brian Harsin is not going to be at Auburn a year from now. So why delay the inevitable? Like, why put it on him and say, well, if you lose to Mizzou, we're firing you. Oh, okay, you eked out a miracle against Mizzou. Okay, now you get to keep your job. No, like, he's not your guy. You got rid, your AD's gone, the guy who hired him. Like, Harsin's going to be gone either way. So that game is just intriguing from a standpoint of Brian Kelly, meter tricking upward. He wants to continue to improve his team in year one there and show, he's building something. Meanwhile, Brian Harsin just trying to survive and keep his job. And so that one is intriguing. I got to think the Eastern Washington, Florida game is going to get canceled or postponed or something because of the impending hurricane that's coming in. But I do want to say Florida looked so good. I mean, you hate to give out moral victories or, that kind of thing.
Especially in that game.
Yeah, they lost to Tennessee, and it's a rivalry game. But, God, Florida looked as good as they've looked all season. Anthony Richardson looked as confident as he ever has. So I think that's a good building block for Florida to build on as the season rolls along because, hey, he finally threw a touchdown pass, and that hadn't happened through the first few weeks. But Alabama-Arkansas to me is the big one. This is a game I picked before the season. I picked the Hogs to win this one. And understand everybody's going to be jumping off Arkansas's bandwagon now because it's, they lost to A&M. Yeah, they lost to a pretty good A&M team. And they lost because they fumbled at the 1-yard line when they were going to make it 21-7. And then they lost because their freaking field goal kicker can't make a chip shot field goal. So, understand. Yeah, Arkansas lost, but I guarantee you if you teed that game up again right now, this moment, Arkansas wins that game. Arkansas is a better team than A&M. They got beat on that game last weekend. It is what it is. I'm not changing my mind. I think Arkansas and Fayetteville, as long as I'm hearing Arkansas talk radio this week, a lot of people saying, KJ Jefferson, he's not the guy and all this. Stop it. Arkansas is still loaded. Arkansas is still a really good team. Rocket Sanders is a great running back. And Alabama's got their problems. Alabama still has issues in the secondary. Alabama's still trying to develop that offensive line. Bryce Young's still trying to develop chemistry with these new wide receivers. Okay, threw a couple touchdown passes against Vandy. So what? That doesn't mean anything. This is a true test. You're going up against an Arkansas team, and yes, they've got their issues in the secondary. But if KJ Jefferson and that ground game and the passing game can keep up with Alabama, keep in mind, they gave Bama a pretty good game last year in Tuscaloosa. They hung with them. Now it's in Fayetteville. If those fans can rally around this team and bring the energy and bring all of that, Bryce Young and Bama, going back to last year, they have struggled on the road. Keep in mind, it was just 2-3 weeks ago where they struggled in Austin and probably should have lost that game. Again, if Texas can get a stop on Bryce Young, literally had him in their hands. They couldn't pull him to the ground on that last drive. And go back to last year. They needed hung on in the swamp to win. They needed a miracle in the Iron Bowl to win that one. So Alabama has struggled on the road. And I've said all season long, at Fayetteville, at Oxford, in Baton Rouge, these are all danger spots for Bryce Young and Alabama if they don't step up to the plate and play well. Now, look, they looked great last week. Bryce Young threw for a ton of touchdown passes. Well, Anderson had a couple sacks. They look great. But again, don't be duped. Don't be a prisoner of the moment and go, well, Bama looked great and Arkansas lost, so clearly Bama's just going to crush Arkansas. No, stop. We hit the reset button. It's a new week. It's a new game. This is the SEC. Teams show up and don't show up every week, and somebody gets their butt beat because they didn't show up ready to play. So, Nick Saban probably hates this. He probably wishes Arkansas had won so that they'd be feeling themselves and, we're undefeated and all this. Now everybody's saying, poor little Arkansas. They lost the game, so now they're going to get their brains beat in by Alabama. Nick Saban hates that because he's like, no, that's rat poison. Don't believe it. Don't listen to it. But, look, I may change my mind 5 times before Saturday, but as of this moment, I still think Arkansas has a great chance to upset Alabama in Fayetteville.
Yeah, it should be an interesting war. And I've said for 4 months, the team that will absolutely get after Bryce Young for 60 minutes, Auburn did it for 58. If you would get after him for 60 minutes, you have a chance because Jahmyr Gibbs is not Brian Robinson. They can't play murder ball. They need him in the pass routes. So if he has to block and you force him to handle that, all of a sudden you have taken their number one weapon off the board and are forcing him to pass pro. And Alabama feels gettable. Probably more so this year than they were even last year with Georgia. Georgia, to me, is head and shoulders above Alabama at the moment.
Yeah, and Bama used to have those shutdown corners, and it's no disrespect. I think Kool-Aid McKinstry's very good. Eli Ricks is still kind of finding his way in that secondary, but like Alabama used to have those DBs that you just put on your they would take your receivers away, and there was nothing you could do about it. They don't have that. And Will Anderson, as good as he is up front, I still think at times if you get rid of the ball quick, like we saw Utah State week 1. I mean, Will Anderson was a non-factor. Now, Utah State couldn't move the chains. They couldn't complete a pass, but the MO was there. Like, they got rid of the ball very quickly, and I think that's what you need to do. But, like I said, there's no John Mechie on this team. There's no Jamison Williams. They're still finding their way with the receivers they have. They're good. Don't get me wrong. There's good young wide receivers there, but they have no skins on the wall, and they need, Heisman winner Bryce Young to kind of hold their hand and show them the way. What happens if they find themselves in a hole in Fayetteville and they're trailing Arkansas? Can they make those big plays down the stretch? So again, it's going to be a fun game. Don't come back at me if Arkansas loses and say, "Oh, you're an idiot." But the other one to watch too in the same realm is A&M at Mississippi State. Mississippi State is a really good team. I thought LSU and their defensive coordinator Matt House had a fantastic game plan 2 weeks ago, bringing a lot of pressure, choosing when to bring pressure on Will Rogers. Will Rogers threw for like 214 yards in the loss to LSU. Again, they made mistakes. They muffed a punt. They made all these stupid mistakes. Probably should have beaten LSU in that game, but they bounced back this past week. 6 touchdown passes from Will Rogers to beat Bowling Green. Ties his own record, school record he threw last year, 6 touchdown passes. A&M might be feeling themselves at the moment right now. Hey, we're big bad A&M. We just beat Miami. We just beat Arkansas. Yeah, now you got to go to Starkville, a team you lost to last year. You lost to both Mississippi schools last year. So, again, Jimbo Fisher and that team, they're still finding their offensive identity. I think Max Johnson is okay at quarterback. He's not good. He's not great. What happens if they find themselves in a shootout where Will Rogers is throwing touchdown after touchdown? Can A&M keep up? A-Chain's great. He just had his first 100-yard rushing game of the season against Arkansas. But can Max Johnson make the throws that they need to win those games, to win this type of game if it's a shootout against Mississippi State? And I don't think so. And so, you're literally talking about what happens all the time, Stephen. The SEC eats its own. It's like you get a big win one week, and then the next week you go and lose. And everybody's like, how'd you lose this game? Oh, it's because it's the SEC. It's tough to win in this conference.
Yeah, and Aniyah Smith, I think I read something today. He's out for the year, and if he's down, that their offense is just Devon A-Chain. That's all that Texas A&M has.
They have a good freshman receiver, Evan Stewart, who was coming along, and he was one of the guys who was suspended in the Miami game, but caught a touchdown pass in the game against Arkansas. But no, Aniyah Smith has been their go-to guy, and former running back turned wide receiver who really had found his niche and was really unguardable at times. I mean, the routes that they would run him on to get him open, but that's a tremendous loss. I know Billy Lucci at Texag said, he confirmed that he's going to be done for the year. So yeah, now it's time for. Remember when A&M was beating their chest about signing that number 1 recruiting class? Hey, time for some of these 4 and 5 stars to step up and rise to the occasion, because this season could go sideways very quickly if they don't find offensive continuity.
All right. Hey, get more on the SEC by making Locked On SEC your second listen. Everyday host Chris Gordy, see, yeah, right there, and his local experts have Locked On take you across the SEC in 30 minutes. Make Locked On SEC your second listen. It's Locked On SEC. Chris, thank you very much for coming on today, and hopefully I can return the favor soon.
Yeah, absolutely, Stephen, and good luck to the Rebs this weekend. Going to be a tough test, but if they win this one, man, look out. Another really good season on the way. Back-to-back really good seasons for Lane.
Yeah, absolutely. Take care, bud.
Thanks, man.